Right, hello. I'm Lucya Starza, and thanks very much for coming to hear me give this talk on Magic for the Month at MoonCon. And now, for those of you who don't know me, I write a Bad Witches blog, and I've written a few titles for Moon Books, which I'm going to show you the covers of. Candle Magic, Guided Visualizations, Poppets and Magical Dolls, Scrying, that one's not quite out yet, and I edited the community book Everyday Magic. Now, Magic for the Month is actually a series of talks I started right at the start of the year. And up to now, I've been doing them on Facebook Live and putting them on my YouTube channel, which you can find recordings of if you look for Lucya Starza. But obviously this month I'm doing it for MoonCon, so I'm kind of stepping up a level with it. Now, I'm also writing a series of blog posts for the Moon Books blog on Magic for the Month as well. And they're going to be eventually, I hope, compiled into and edited into a Pagan Portal's Wheel of the Year book. But I really only just started doing that this month, and you can find the first one that I did if you go and look there. It was on the 1st of June. Let me get your months right. So yes, Magic for the month of June. Now, for this talk, I'm going to be reading some notes, which I've got on my Kindle because I don't always remember everything exactly that I want to say. So, the topic of this talk is Magic for the month of June. Now, the Wiccan High Priestess Maureen Brown, whose coven I was in many years ago, used to always say that the first thing you do when you're doing anything, when you're writing something or doing something about the Wheel of the Year, is you look out of the window. You can see what's growing there. You can see what's happening in nature. Use that for inspiration. And that's always the first thing that I do when I write my Magic for the Month talks. I look out of the window. Now, I think a lot of people in England have noticed that spring's been quite late this year and summer's been quite late starting. And really, that's a good example of how the Wheel of the Year is really only a rough guide to the seasons. It's really good as a rough guide, but things don't always fall exactly as you expect them to. And so looking out of the window is a great guide to what's really happening. Now, I live on the edge of London in a suburb which is very green, and looking out of my study window when I was writing this talk at the start of the month, the thing that really struck me was that finally all the trees were green. Now, you'd normally expect all the trees to be green in May, but they weren't. There were still a few sparse branches, back in mid-May and even late May. Now, oak and ash are among the last trees to get their leaves normally, and there's an old weather saying, oak and ash, we're in for a splash. Sorry, oak before ash, we're in for a splash. Ash before oak, we're in for a soak. Now, I kind of kept a bit of an eye on that this year. There's an ash tree within clear sight of my study window, actually my neighbour's garden, and an oak tree down my local park where I go for my daily walks. And the ash tree did green later than the oak. So hopefully, although May was quite wet, hopefully the rest of the summer won't be quite so wet. Now, June is a month that's normally abundant with summer flowers. And throughout this talk, I'm going to mention a few seasonal ones with magical significance. And I'm going to start with elder. Yeah, I know elder's another tree rather than a flower, but the one at the end of my garden is usually covered in delicate white blossoms in early June. And, I was thinking, right, okay, that's great. I'll go out and pick some elder. And, well, when I went out and looked at my tree this morning to pick some elder, the only bits that were actually in blossom yet were pretty high up. So I had to go and get someone to help me and drag the branches down. I have picked some. This is some elder in blossom, but it was a bit of a reach to get it. So yeah, another sign that everything's just a little bit late this year. Now, a bit of elder lore. Elder is very much associated with witches in English folklore. According to legends, some witches can shapeshift into it. There's a particular tale associated with the Rollright stones that a witch cursed a group of upstart knights and turned herself into an elder tree to watch over them, make sure they didn't get up to any more mischief. I think they were planning to overthrow someone. Also, folklore relates that if an elder tree growing in the garden of a witch is cut, its owner will bleed. Now, realistically, that's not entirely true. I pruned my elder tree this morning, as you can see, and I didn't notice any peculiar cuts appear on my skin. But also, I've never quite mastered the trick of shape-shifting into an elder tree, so maybe if I could do the one, the other would happen too. Now, what I would say is before cutting any tree, do ask permission of the tree and also permission of anyone whose land it's on. I mean, obviously my elder tree's in my own garden, so I gave myself permission, but I always, before I'm going to cut a piece, I say, is it all right to cut a piece, and explain the uses that I want it for. Now, elder trees are sometimes grown near houses as protection from malefic magic. Particularly, that's in part of Eastern Europe, but I think that's a tradition, folklore tradition that can be found in other places too. Elder has many healing properties, but that's outside the scope of this talk. If you're interested in herbalism, then I'd recommend The Healing Power of Celtic Plants by Angela Payne, who points out that elder was one of the sacred trees of the ancient Celts, and both the blossoms and the fruit are medicinal. I'm going to go on now to wild roses. Wild roses are another June bloom in my garden, and I really love them. Now, again, normally they are starting to bloom in early June, and I went out 2 days ago and there was not a single one in bloom. I went out this morning and just a few had started to bloom, and there's one. The ones in my garden, you can get them in slightly different colours. You can get sort of white ones and darker ones, but the ones in my garden are pale pink, and the wild rose has 5 petals as well as sharp thorns on the stems. Now, I would say that wild roses do only bloom once. Now, cultivated roses, like the ones you can see behind me, they will continue to bloom all summer, but the wild roses, they just bloom once and then they're over. Now, although all roses symbolise love, the wild rose also symbolises the wildness of nature, which can be both beautiful and cruel. And they do often need cutting back. My garden's pretty wild. It is pretty overgrown. I make a lot of space for wildlife. But if you don't cut back things sometimes, you will end up with too many things in overgrowing the other things. And with the wild roses, if you don't cut them back quite frequently, you're probably going to end up with a house that looks a bit like Sleeping Beauty's castle. But you can make use of what you prune, and pruned rose stems, especially the really thick rose stems, can be transformed into wands if you dry out the stems, cut them to length, and then sand or cut off the thorns at the handle end. Now, there's one that I made a couple of years ago, actually. It's quite a decent wand length and very, very sharp thorns. It is actually from the wild rose, when I had to prune back the wild rose, and I've covered the handle in some ribbon. Now, obviously, a rose wand can be used in love magic, but also for help in cutting unwanted romantic ties and dispelling enchantments. The rose is sacred to a number of goddesses, including Aphrodite, but also Isis. The Rose of Isis appears in the allegorical novel The Golden Ass, which is an ancient a piece of writing, as the sweet rose of reason and virtue that saves the hero from a bewitched life in the form of a donkey. A rose wand could also be used for magic that you don't want discovered. In ancient Rome, the wild rose was a symbol for a real chamber of secrets, and was associated with Hippocrates, god of silence, secrets, and confidentiality. A wild rose would be placed on the door of a room where confidential matters were being discussed, or painted on the borders around the ceilings of rooms as a sign that topics discussed there were not to be repeated outside. And the phrase sub rosa, or under the rose, means to keep a secret, and it is derived from that practice. Now, to see what flowers, plants and trees are growing in your area, going for a walk, if you're able, is even better than just looking out of the window. Now, regular walks, and I've mentioned I do go for a little walk around my park. Now, they're among the easiest ways to keep in tune with nature and to watch the seasons change. Even if you live in a city like London, there are plenty of parks, tree-lined streets and verges where wildflowers grow. In the community book, Everyday Magic, which I edited and has a lot of Moon Books writers and authors sent in entries for it, Geraldine Beskin of the Atlantis Bookshop wrote the entry for today, June the 5th, on going for a walk. And I'll read that out. Go for a walk. The beginning of June can be windy, but as the days are long, it doesn't matter much. These bright, sometimes chilly days are times to go for a brisk walk around the park, plotting what you want to be done, what you want to get done over the summer. Leave tense teenagers behind and find space in your head for what to do when their exams are done and before the dreaded results arrive. Use the crisp wind to blow away cobwebs, and use the movement in the grass, the leaves and your hair to refresh yourself. I'm now going to talk about June festivals. Now, as I mentioned in my post on the Moon Books blog earlier this month, many pagans see nature, many people see paganism as a nature religion. Yep, got there in the end. It's me reading notes. With eco-spirituality at its heart. Now, several days this month encourage everyone to focus on these themes. And I think Rachel Patterson spoke quite a bit about that this morning in her talk. But today, June the 5th, is World Environment Day. June the 8th is World Oceans Day. And June the 18th is an international day for combating drought. And most of us could do more to help the environment. And I'm sure we are all aware of little changes that we could make to reduce the impact of our impact on the environment. And as pagans, we can try to reduce the impact of our own private and public festivals. Rather than take cars to go to an event, we can use public transport, or perhaps try to find an event close to home. We can avoid single-use plastic at picnics or parties if at all possible. And we can take our stuff and our rubbish home with us afterwards. And of course, we can engage in cleanup operations to tackle the waste that other people who are perhaps less thoughtful leave behind. I mean, I think we always get shocked when we see pictures on, in the news of the rubbish that's been left behind at places like Stonehenge. And, we can take our own stuff home, but yeah, we can also set an example by helping to clear up the things that other people leave behind. Of course, the big festival in June in the wheel of the year is the solstice, which in the Northern Hemisphere is in the summer on June 21st. And the word solstice comes from the Latin, I'll probably mispronounce this, sol sistere, which means sun stand still, because the sun appears to stay still in the sky briefly. Afterwards, until the winter solstice, the days get shorter and the nights longer. Although the warmest weather of summer is still to come in my part of the world, with July and August often being the hottest months. I know always after the summer solstice it's a bit, it's all downhill here. But it actually isn't, because, summer can be really glorious after that. So, yeah, I think you can celebrate the height of the sun, but then after that, still celebrate the summer. Now, sometimes you see the summer solstice being given the name Litha, especially by those who follow Wiccan style practices. And it was probably only named that in the mid-20th century, although it might have been based on a term that the historian Bede said was a Saxon word for this time of year. And really, I would say whatever word you prefer to use in your practice is fine. There are many different traditions have different names for the summer solstice, and they're all fine. Use whatever is right for you. Whatever you call it, I'm sure that all pagans are aware that the summer solstice has been marked as a special occasion for thousands of years and by many cultures. And fire was a big part of many celebrations, including bonfires, torchlit processions, and sometimes rolling burning wheels down a hill. Apparently that was a very popular one at one time. Professor Ronald Hutton, in his book Stations of the Sun, A History of the Ritual Year in Britain, writes that mid to late June was a popular time for festivities of this kind in many parts of Europe. The fires were often seen as a form of purification and to ward off evil, but probably also symbolised the fire of the sun. And a burning wheel is a common sun symbol. Ronald Hutton believes there's enough evidence to suggest that midsummer fire festivals stretch back to ancient pagan times. He wrote that the dossier seems to be complete enough to speak confidently of a pre-Christian seasonal ritual of major importance that involved fire. Modern celebrations usually have to take fire safety more seriously than our ancestors did, but you could light a fire outdoors where they're allowed, and indoors you can light a candle to mark the occasion. You can also create sun symbols, such as wheels or sun crosses, from natural materials without setting a light to them, unless you want to and it's safe. There are examples of equal-armed crosses in a circle from very ancient times. Modern pagan variants sometimes give them 8 arms to symbolise the wheel of the year itself. And another popular solar symbol is the sunburst, or a circle with rays. Now, I don't think you have to stick precisely to ancient traditions. I think you can if you want to, but you really don't have to. And I'm going to show you in a bit a picture of a circular sun ray mandala that I created for the summer solstice a few years ago from seasonal flowers and grasses that I gathered in my garden. I'm just going to turn my Kindle around to show you the picture. There, I hope you can see that. I'm not going to risk sharing the screen. I'll probably make a mistake and manage to cut myself off from the internet if I do that. So yeah, in the photo, I did boost the colour saturation to bring out the vibrant yellows and greens, but it was still pretty sunlight before that. I wanted to make the sun mandala mainly from grasses, partly because June is when grass pollen gives me hay fever, and I've sneezed my way through quite a few summer solstice rituals in the past. But grasses are also a vital part of the natural world, and I wanted to celebrate the beauty and variety of them. In terms of magic, grass is protective. You can gather long grass and tie a small sheaf into a knot as a simple ward against ill wishing. Now, in the centre of that mandala that I showed you are honeysuckle and something called tutson. According to folklore, if honeysuckle grows near your home, it will attract money, love, and good luck. Its sweet scent is also supposed to help clear the mind and promote psychic powers. Tutson is a shrub that is a type of St. John's wort associated with the Feast of St. John on the 24th of June. And I'm going to talk about St. John's wort later. Now, the yellow tutson flowers quickly turn to berries, which you can see in the very centre of that mandala. If you're foraging outside your own garden, make sure picking flowers is allowed and don't take more than you need. I'm just going to have a little sip of water because my mouth gets a bit dry when I'm giving talks. It's a water bottle, not gin. I always say that. Why people would assume that I'm speaking gin, I don't know. That's a bit better. Now, creating a mandala each month from things found in nature to meditate on is a reflection of how our own feelings change, as well as the celebration of the seasons change. And if you do this over the month and again in different years, you can observe how each year has a pattern of similarities, but is never quite the same. Different things will be flowering at slightly different times, and there can be a very different energy to the season each year. I mentioned the High Priestess Maureen Brown, and another thing she always used to say is that it's not really a wheel of the year, it's a spiral of the years, because you kind of go around in a circle, but you don't exactly follow, you don't go, it doesn't repeat, it doesn't completely repeat, it kind of spirals. Now, I should also add that I'm using the term mandala pretty loosely to mean a picture or a pattern with a spiritual significance to meditate on. I know in the original sense of the word, it comes from Hinduism and Buddhism and is a reflection of the universe and the connectedness of life. And my use is a little bit more eclectic. Now, the summer solstice again, and talking about what people can be getting up to. In England, we will have more freedom to get outside this June than we did last year. And personally, what I'm going to be doing is climbing up my local hill in South London to greet the sunrise at the solstice dawn. There are still good reasons to stay away from big crowds. And if you're planning on visiting an ancient sacred site, do check the latest rules before setting off. Last year and again this year, you can watch the sunset and sunrise at Stonehenge live streamed for free. So those who can't get there or who don't want to can enjoy the solstice from their own homes. I watched it last year. I watched the sunrise last year, and it really was very it's very, very nice to. I've been there in person in previous years, but kind of watching it live streamed when I couldn't get out was actually was quite moving. You can find more details about that on the English Heritage website. Now, another good way to experience the magic of the seasons without leaving home is to do a guided visualization. And I'm going to offer, I'm going to read out a guided visualization called the Sun Temple. It's a shortened version of, I'm not going to read it from my book, but I'll show you my book, Guided Visualizations, again. It's a shortened version on that because I am aware that I'm up against a bit of a time limit. And yeah, I can see that I'm about 24 minutes way through my talk already. Now, it's a shortened version of one in my book, and you can, in it, you imagine you are traveling to a temple sacred to the sun, and you can visualize a temple anywhere you like. It can be one that you know or would like to visit, or one from your imagination. The visualization also offers an opportunity to make a promise, vow, or dedication. So you might want to think about whether you would like to do that at this time. Now, obviously, guided visualizations are journeys we make in our mind. You should be, to do it, you should be somewhere safe where you can close your eyes and where you won't be disturbed. So if you're not in a place where you're safe and can close your eyes and won't be disturbed, then you can just listen to it as you would a story rather than trying to visualize it in your mind's eye. And that's fine. You can always, it can be recorded. You can always go back and do it later. So, if you're ready, let's begin. So sit comfortably and close your eyes. Take 3 deep breaths in and out, in and out, in and out, and relax. Visualize the following. Visualize that you are walking on a sacred route to a temple of the sun on the day of the summer solstice. Walk on towards the temple. Visualize your approach until you stand before its outer boundaries. Look up at the temple. What does it look like? What is happening? What are the sights and sounds and smells of this place? You see that the entrance is guarded. Only those who pass the guardian scrutiny and behave appropriately will be allowed to pass. Walk up to the entrance, greet the guardians, and ask what is necessary to enter the temple. If you do as is asked, you may pass the scrutiny of the guardians and pass through the entrance. You make your way inwards to the sacred space at the heart of the temple, where the sun will align at the moment of the solstice. You have arrived in time. Look around you. Are you in light or darkness? What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? Are others with you? You wait. Slowly, a focused ray of light from the sun enters the temple, moving over the ground and highlighting the features of this sacred space. What does it look like? What is happening? Watch and do what you know is right at this time and in this place. The sun reaches its zenith, and for a moment it seems as though the sun is standing still, as though time is standing still, as though you are connected through space and time to all those who have been in the sun's sacred space in the past and in the future. It is a magical moment, perhaps a time to make a vow, a promise, or a dedication to a spiritual path. If you wish to do so now. And at last the stretched moment ends. The ray of sunlight starts to move again over the ground. You watch, and at last its last focused ray leaves the area of the sacred space. It is time to leave. You walk out of the space and through the temple back to the entrance. You pass the guardians and leave the temple behind you. You head back along the route you travelled to the place you started from. Then prepare to return to normal reality. When you're ready, take a deep breath, shake your fingers and toes, and open your eyes to the real world. And I hope you found that useful. After you've done any magical work, including guided visualizations, it's good to ground, and you can do that by having something to eat and drink. But if that's not immediately available, you can kind of stamp your feet on the ground or tap a hard surface a few times to try and bring us to ground yourself a little bit. Now, I'm going to talk for about another 5 minutes, and then after that, we'll have some questions and answers. Now, a question that often comes up is whether midsummer in the Northern Hemisphere is the same date as the solstice or later on the 24th of June. And many pagans call the solstice midsummer, but for hundreds of years, most people in Europe celebrated midsummer on June the 24th, the Christian feast of St. John the Baptist. And this is just before the days start to become noticeably shorter. Midsummer's Eve is traditionally a time for divination. So if you use tarot cards or a crystal ball or other forms of scrying, it's a really good time to do so. And midsummer is also traditionally the best time to collect herbs and wildflowers for magical or medicinal purposes. One tradition is if you gather wildflowers from a churchyard and put them under your pillow on Midsummer's Eve, you will dream of a future lover. Also, it was when plants were collected, as I've mentioned. I've mentioned a few earlier, but other plants that were traditionally collected around Midsummer's Day were fennel, which is protective, rue, which is good to put in healing poppets or sachets, rosemary, which is excellent for smoke cleansing, lemon verbena, which is good for love spells, and elderflowers, which I've mentioned earlier. Another bit of Midsummer Eve magic, according to English folklore, if you watch ferns and collect the seeds that fall at exactly midnight, you can use them to make yourself invisible. Now, actually, ferns don't have seeds, they have spores. I don't know whether the spores will do the same thing. Now, another plant that's really traditionally associated with midsummer, and I briefly mentioned it earlier, is St. John's wort, which is actually named after St. John, whose feast day is on the 24th. It's traditionally used magically to keep away evil, and it's also highly medicinal, sometimes still used to treat depression today, though I'm not offering any medical advice. I'm purely talking really about magical uses of herbs in this talk. Now, whatever you do for the summer solstice and midsummer, I really hope you have a wonderful time. Now, I'm going to take questions now about anything I've talked about, whether it's about the festivals or the guided visualization or anything else really that you want to ask about. So if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. While I'm waiting to see if there are any questions, because I'm not actually seeing any questions yet, I will briefly show my books again. I hope you're not bored with seeing my book covers. Guided visualizations, that is, it's really aimed, it's aimed at witches rather than being more new age guided visualizations. So there's guided visualizations for the wheel of the year and for the elements and that kind of thing. Now, Everyday Magic, as I mentioned, that is a book I edited which has something magical for every day of the year in it. Scrying, that will be coming out early next year. Poppets for Magical Dolls. And Candle Magic. So, how was the guided visualization? If there are any questions, any tips for focusing during meditation? Um, yeah, I mean, I would say that if you struggle, if I would say guided visualizations are a very good way of focusing during meditation, because you can focus on the words that are being said, and also you can use a mandala for meditation. So if you're someone who really finds it difficult to clear their minds, and am I find it very difficult to completely clear my mind, I much prefer to use something like an image to meditate on, or a guided visualization or a guided meditation for meditation. So yeah, I would recommend them. Now that's interesting, because obviously Shakespeare wrote um, um, a Midsummer, about Midsummer's Eve, but there's, according to folklore, there's probably more Fey activity around May Day and Beltane. So I'm sure I'm not really an expert in fairy lore, but my experience would be that, really, that Beltane is perhaps more associated with the Fae. Although I mean, I have done midsummer rituals honouring uh, deities that are associated with the Fae. So I wouldn't say more active, but yeah, they can be active. Right. Well, the summer solstice, it does vary slightly, because it is an astronomical thing, and some years it will fall on the 20th and some on the 21st. This year it's falling on the 21st, but it's an astronomical thing. So if you look at sort of astronomical sites, you will find the exact moment when the sun stands still, and the exact moment of the solstice. Oh, how wonderful, having a birthday on the 21st. Right, well, I would just say celebrate, have a brilliant time. It's you've got the longest day of the year to do it. So I would say that uh, celebrate the summer solstice, but you consider yourself doubly blessed, really, by the sun on your birthday. Yeah, happy birthday. There is some fascinating Central and Eastern European fairy lore associated with the summer solstice. Any recommendations for anyone who feels like communicating? Right, well, I would say that my own background, although I have a Polish name, and I do know little bits and pieces of Eastern European fairy lore, I'm not an expert. So, I mean, really, what I would say, whenever you're interested in finding out about the folklore of a different of a particular culture, is read books on the subject, and do research. And I'm not. I know I should know more, but actually I was brought up in England, and my background really is far more in traditional English magic than in Eastern European magic. I'm sorry about that, but I'm not going to talk about something that isn't my area of speciality. I found myself in a pyramid top 10. Oh, wonderful. Which is interesting, because I don't really associate with the Egyptian pantheon doing guided meditation. Oh, well, that's wonderful. I mean, I think that's the wonderful thing about guided visualizations, is that they can sometimes spring up things that we weren't expecting, and we can make a note of them. I think it's always really useful to make notes of them and how it felt to us. I mean, it could be that it's showing something that you need to look into, perhaps something to meditate further on, to research more, or a calling for a place to visit. I mean, if you get a chance to go to Egypt and visit the pyramids, do. It is absolutely amazing. I went there once, and I would love to go back again. So it's 24th. Well, yeah, it's the feast of St. John the Baptist. It's kind of like, I mean, the um, with the summer solstice being a few days before the feast of St. John the Baptist, it is a little bit like the winter solstice being a few days before Christmas. And what actually happens is, although the solstice happens and the days the days stay roughly the same length, and it's only a few days later that it becomes noticeable that the days are getting shorter, or in the winter getting longer. And so I think that it's possibly that in kind of medieval times, people celebrated a feast day when they noticed the change in the length of day and would have tied it into a saint. That's only my own personal feeling. I'm not a historian as such, and someone could correct me on that. But I think there's a little bit of what people noticed happening, and they'd celebrate what they noticed happening. Do you work specifically with the months in your own practice rather than sabbats, or both? Both, absolutely. I'm quite eclectic, and it depends on what I'm doing. I mean, when I was in a Wiccan coven, we would meet every month, but we would celebrate, obviously, the full moon, and we would celebrate the Wheel of the Year festivals as well. But in my own personal practice, I will celebrate with the way the day feels. I mean, I think the Wheel of the Year is incredibly useful as a kind of a rough guide. And also, if you want to get together with a whole bunch of people, it's easy to say, oh, well, that festival falls on that date, so we'll plan in advance to all meet up somewhere and do something. But if you're on your own, if you're a solitary practitioner, then working with the energy of the day, the energy of the weather, it can be more effective for your personal practice. Right, well, I don't know if there are any more questions, but thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be giving another Magic for the Month talk next month. That will probably be on Facebook Live again, and I'll put it on my YouTube channel, and I'll also link to it on my blog. So you can follow my blog at www.babwitch.co.uk, and I'm also blogging regularly now on the Moon Books blog, and so you can find my posts there. At the moment, they're under the name Lucya Starza. I probably should explain that my dad's name was Anthony Starza Starza, and when I started writing for Moon Books, I decided to use the name Starza because it's more easy to pronounce than Starza. So yeah, Lucya Starza is kind of my pen name, but it's also a family name. But you might sometimes see me as Lucya Starza. Do you find yourself working more with the months or the lunar cycles and various types of moons? Well, both. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I work with the moon. The phases of the moon are really important for magic, and certainly when I'm scrying, I do find that I scry after dark. Whenever possible, I scry after dark. I find it much more effective. You can put a scarf over your head to block out sunlight or close the curtains. But when I was doing my scrying book, I was very scrupulous in keeping a diary of my scrying and how the phases of the moon affected it. And it does. There's so much more energy around at the time of the full moon for any type of magical working. Right. Well, if there's no more questions, then I'm really just going to say thank you very, very much for attending, and I really hope you enjoyed it. And if there are any other questions, then you can, as I said, you can find me on my blog, or look for Lucya Starza on Facebook and ask me other questions.